smart green economy.
Moana Mackie.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, John Key must stand down his Minister, John Banks. That is clear. The allegations against Mr Banks of electoral fraud are so serious that it is not appropriate that a Minister of the Crown remain in that position with the allegations that are now against him, which are now going to be taken to court. John Key must act now to stand down John Banks. This is a government being propped up, passing controversial legislation against the best interests of New Zealanders, propped up by one man who is now facing charges of electoral fraud. That is rotten to the core. Prime Minister John Key must act now to restore the credibility of this House and this Parliament. Mr Speaker, when John Key became Prime Minister, we heard a lot about how he was going to hold his ministers to the highest ethical standards, and if they did not meet those standards, then he would stand them down. Well, he has failed that test today. There should be no question as to whether John Banks remains a minister in his government. No question at all, given these are allegations of electoral fraud. Electoral fraud. For a Member of Parliament to be facing those allegations is devastating, but as a Minister of the Crown, it is not appropriate that he remains in that position, and we wait still to hear what Prime Minister John Key is going to do and what's happened to those highest ethical standards that he once held. And this is a case that hasn't just been in the last hour, Dr Smith. This goes back many months. Many months. And as my colleague says, he's already been convicted once. So this should not, we should not be put in this position with the credibility of this House being undermined. But unfortunately what we've seen from this government have been low standards for ministers right across the board. The previous speaker mentioned the Minister of Energy and his performance on Campbell Live the other night, his extraordinary performance. Phil Heatley would never have behaved like that on Campbell Live as Minister of Energy. It was an extraordinary performance. I think anyone turning into that performance would have been asking themselves, who is this Miss Anna Darko, and why is the Minister Simon Bridges so taken with her? It was the most extraordinary performance from a Minister of Energy who is meant to be neutral, who is meant to be... Remember, this is the man who now has half the decision-making power over whether these activities go ahead in the Department of Conservation estate. Does anyone seriously believe that Simon Bridges is ever going to say no to an oil company? No. Is ever going to say no? After that performance on Campbell Live, where he completely dismissed the very genuine concerns of the people of Kaikoura, the very genuine concerns. This is a community that Phil Heatley, when he was Minister of Energy, he promised them that they would be able to have a say through a public submission process on any deep-sea drilling. Phil Heatley promised them that. Good old Phil Heatley, a good Minister of Energy. And then we get Simon Bridges, who comes along with Amy Adams, the supposed Minister for the Environment, although she's a minister acting constantly against the environment, who then takes that away. Who makes a lie of Phil Heatley's promise to the good people of Kaikoura that they would have a say on any deep-sea drilling that was going to go on off their coast. And the reason this is so concerning is because the legislation that Amy Adams has put in place governing this activity is so utterly bereft of any protection for the environment, that we have a very real risk of something going wrong. And we saw what happened when something went wrong in the Gulf of Mexico. We saw what went wrong. And the Minister, Amy Adams, got some advice from her officials where she asked what the impact of an oil spill would be on New Zealand. And she came to the House and she said, well, the officials said it may well be significant. Well, we got those documents, and what the officials said is it will very likely be catastrophic. Now, I think there's a bit of a difference between very likely catastrophic and maybe significant. Now, Amy Adams says that's quibbling over words. Oh dear. But my concern is what those words represent. And what those words represent is the very real impact on our coastal environment of an oil spill under legislation that is so weak that it does not provide the basic environmental protections that the international conventions we have signed up to require us to provide. Because this is a government that is so desperate to grease the wheels for industry at any cost that it doesn't matter whether it's the rights of workers in New Zealand, access to low-cost pharmaceuticals or our environment, which we rely on entirely for our economy. Those are all up for sale under a national government.
Honourable Kate Wilkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this week